Sometimes life sends an experience that divides your life in two. There's the version of you that existed before, and the version of you that had to emerge after. Most people spend years trying to recover the life they had before the impact. But every once in a while, someone does something different. They begin paying attention, not only to what happened, but to what the experience revealed. Because hardship has a strange way of doing that. It reveals people. It strips away performance. It interrupts illusion. And eventually, if the person is willing to grow through it instead of collapse beneath it, it introduces them to parts of themselves they never would have met otherwise. Over the years, I started noticing something. The people who evolve through difficult experiences, the people who somehow turn pain into clarity, the people who carry light forward after life gave them every reason to become bitter, they tend to live by the same deeper truths. Not rules, not perfection. More like principles that quietly shape the way they move through the world. And the more I paid attention to those principles, the more I realized they appeared everywhere. In healing, in leadership, in responsibility, in growth. In the messages that life keeps trying to send us until we finally listen. So today, I want to share 10 of those principles with you. 10 ideas that seem to echo through the lives of people who choose evolution over resentment, purpose over victimhood, and light over darkness. I call them the 10 Torchbearer Commandments. Not because torchbearers are perfect people, but because they're the people who went through something difficult and decided to become deeper instead of harder. And honestly, that decision changes everything. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Welcome to the show. Before I jump in, I just wanted to thank all of you for your patience. Life asked me to slow down for just a minute and reset and recharge a little bit. But I'm here now. And honestly, I think this episode arrived exactly when it was supposed to. Let's get to it. Every torchbearer has an experience, as I mentioned a moment ago, that splits their life in two. Not something small, not a bad week, something heavy and enough to permanently alter the direction of who they were becoming. At first, most people experience those moments as pure disruption. The loss, the heartbreak, the collapse of certainty, or the version of their life they thought they were building suddenly no longer exists the way they imagined it would. And naturally, the first instinct is usually resistance. People ask, why is this happening? How do I get back to who I was before? But torchbearers, they eventually realize something different. Some experiences are not meant to return you to your old life. They arrived to introduce you to a new one. Because hardship has a way of revealing things that comfort never could. It reveals resilience, depth, perceptive, strength that never could be tested before. And whilst most people spend years cursing the experience that changed them, torchbearers eventually learn to honor it. Not because the pain was enjoyable, not because the experience was fair, but because it revealed something real. It revealed who they were capable of becoming once illusion, comfort, and certainty were stripped away. That's why the first Torchbearer Commandment is this. The hard thing is the beginning. Not the end, not the punishment, the beginning. Because many of the strongest, wisest, most grounded people you'll ever meet were shaped in the aftermath of an experience they never would have chosen for themselves. And yet somehow, that experience became the forge, the place where a deeper version of them was finally introduced to the world. And once people realize the hard thing changed them, the next question becomes, who's going to save them from it? Let's talk about that next. At some point, every torchbearer arrives at a realization that feels both terrifying and strangely liberating. No one is coming. No rescue. No sudden moment where life finally pauses long enough to carry them safely to the other side of their pain. And for a while, that realization can feel heavy because most people are raised believing someone eventually arrives to fix things. Someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows what to do. But life has a way of eventually placing all of us in a moment where we realize we have to participate in our own rescue. And that changes people. Because the moment a person stops waiting for permission to reclaim their life, something powerful begins to wake up inside them. Ownership, responsibility, movement. Not because fear disappears, but because survival eventually demands action. And torchbearers learn something most people never really understand. Waiting too long to be saved can quietly become a prison. Not always physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. People begin postponing their growth until someone else believes in them first, until someone else heals them first, until someone else gives them permission to begin again. But eventually, the people who evolve realize something important. No one can walk your inner path for you. Other people can support you. They can love you, guide you, and even stand beside you. But nobody can become you on your behalf. That part belongs to you. And strangely enough, the moment a person fully accepts that reality, they stop feeling powerless. Because now, their life is no longer waiting on someone else to arrive. Now, the movement can begin. That's why the second Torchbearer Commandment is this: no one is coming. Not to frighten you, to free you. Because the moment you stop waiting to be saved is often the exact moment you begin becoming powerful. And once a person begins reclaiming their power, another realization usually follows. Growth becomes impossible to avoid the moment blame ends. Let's talk about that next. One of the hardest transitions in personal evolution is the moment a person stops asking, whose fault is this? And starts asking, what do I do now? Because those are two completely different mindsets. One keeps the person emotionally trapped inside the experience. The other begins moving them beyond it. And to be clear, torchbearers are not people who pretend life was always fair. They know pain exists. They know betrayal exists. They know some people were handed burdens they never deserved to carry. This commandment is not about denying reality. It's about refusing to let reality become the final authority over who they become. Because eventually, every evolving person realizes something uncomfortable. Blame may explain your pain, but it will never transform your life. Let me repeat that. Blame may explain your pain, but it will never transform your life. Only responsibility can do that. And responsibility is often misunderstood. Most people hear the word and immediately think punishment, pressure, shame. But real responsibility is something much deeper than that. It's the moment a person decides, my life may not have started in my control, but my direction still belongs to me. That realization changes everything, because now growth becomes possible. Now healing becomes possible. Now movement becomes possible. And this is where torchbearers separate themselves from bitterness. They stop building their identity entirely around what happened to them and begin building it around who they choose to become because of it. That shift is powerful because people who take responsibility for their evolution, they stop waiting for perfect circumstances before they begin growing. They begin now, in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of the unfinished healing, in the middle of the life they actually have. That's why the third Torchbearer Commandment is this: responsibility is the turning point. Take responsibility for your life, even the parts you didn't cause, because growth begins the moment blame stops being the center of your story. And once a person begins taking responsibility for their healing, something unexpected starts to happen. Other people begin noticing. Let's talk about that next. Most people think leadership begins the moment someone gains influence, the title, a platform, a position of authority. But real leadership usually begins much earlier than that. It begins the moment a person heals in a way that other people can see it. Because visible healing gives people permission to believe change is possible for them as well. And that matters more than most people realize. Humans learn deeply through observation, through energy, through example. People watch how you respond to pressure, how you carry yourself after disappointment, how you speak about life after it hurt you. And whether you realize it or not, your healing teaches people something, especially the people silently searching for evidence that growth is still possible. That's why torchbearers become powerful without always trying to. Because people can feel when someone has suffered without allowing suffering to become their identity. That kind of person changes rooms, not loudly, but deeply, and often without even realizing it. That's why the fourth Torchbearer Commandment is this: healing becomes leadership. Healed loudly enough that others realize it's possible. Because sometimes the strongest form of leadership is showing people what survival with wisdom looks like. And here's your first mini challenge. This week, pay attention to how you respond when life gets frustrating or uncomfortable. Not perfectly, just honestly. Because people are always learning something from the way we handle pressure, setbacks, and difficult moments. Torchbearers understand that leadership isn't only about what we say. It's also about the energy we bring into hard situations. So this week, try responding with a little more awareness, a little more intention. You never know who might be needing you as an example right now. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how deeply people are affected by someone who handles life with quiet strength? Not perfection and not performance, just presence. The kind of person who goes through something difficult and somehow comes out softer instead of colder. People remember that because human beings learn by watching each other far more than we realize. We watch how people respond to pressure, how they speak when they're frustrated, how they carry themselves after disappointment. And slowly, without even noticing it, we absorb pieces of each other. And that's why torchbearers understand something important. Your life is teaching people something, whether you intend for it or not. Think about that for a second. Someone around you right now may be learning how you handle pain by watching how you handle yours. Someone may be learning resilience from the way you keep going, or learning fear from the way you retreat from yourself. Either way, something is being taught. And honestly, that realization changes the way a person moves through the world, because now life becomes bigger than their personal survival. Now your energy matters. Your responses matter. Your examples matter. That's why the fifth Torchbearer Commandment is this: your life is teaching people something. Live in a way that teaches courage. Because once a person realizes their pain is teaching something, the next question becomes, what if the pain itself was never the end of the story? Let's talk about that next. But real quick, before we continue, thank you for being here. Seriously. Thank you for listening, supporting the show, sharing these conversations, and growing through all of this with me. And if you've been enjoying Challenge Accepted with Jonah C., don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, or share the show and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And come hang with me out on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, Snapchat, and Threads. Basically everywhere at this point. We're building something really special together. Pain changes people. That part is unavoidable. The real question is, what does it change them into? Because unresolved pain has a way of quietly reshaping a person's inner world. Sometimes it becomes bitterness, sometimes distrust, sometimes emotional distance so subtle the person barely notices it's happening. And honestly, a lot of people spend years believing their pain permanently defined them. Maybe you've met someone like that before. Or maybe, at certain points in your life, you've been that person yourself. I know I have. Someone who slowly stopped expecting life to feel meaningful again. Stopped expecting themselves to feel fully alive again. But let me ask you something. What if pain was never meant to become your identity? What if it was meant to become your depth? Because torchbearers eventually realize something important. Pain by itself teaches you nothing. Reflection does. Healing does. Honest self-examination does. That's where wisdom actually comes from, not suffering alone. There are people who suffer for years and years and grow colder. And there are others who somehow become more compassionate or more grounded, more understanding of the human experience. That difference matters. Because eventually every person chooses what they will do with the pain life handed to them, whether consciously or unconsciously. That's why the sixth Torchbearer Commandment is this: your pain is not the end of the story. Turn wounds into understanding, because some of the deepest wisdom people carry was born from the experiences they once thought would destroy them. And here's your next mini challenge. Think about one difficult experience that changed you. And now ask yourself honestly, did it make you more closed off or more understanding? More reactive or more intentional? You don't have to judge the answer. Just become aware of it. Because awareness is often where healing quietly begins. And once a person begins transforming pain into wisdom, they start realizing something else. The fire inside them was not accidental. Now let's talk about that next. There's a depth that only certain people carry. You can feel it almost immediately. Not in the way they speak, not in status, not even in performance. In presence. It's the kind of presence that usually comes from someone who has been tested by life and chose not to disappear afterward. Think about it for just a minute. Some people go through experiences and spend the rest of their lives running from them. Others walk through the fire and come out understanding themselves more clearly than they ever did before. That changes a person. Because eventually, torchbearers realize something powerful. The experience that nearly broke them also revealed them. Their resilience, their depth, their capacity to survive things they once believed would destroy them. And no, that doesn't mean the experience was easy. It doesn't mean that the pain was beautiful. But it does mean something meaningful emerged from it. A different kind of strength. Not loud strength. Not ego. Something steadier than that. The kind of inner fire people develop when life forces them to confront themselves honestly. And maybe that's why certain people carry a different energy for hardship. Not because they became fearless, but because they stopped underestimating what they were capable of enduring. That realization changes the way a person moves through life. Because now they understand something most people spend years searching for. Their fire was earned. That's why the seventh Torchbearer Commandment is this: the hard thing forged the flame. The experience that nearly broke you may have also revealed the deepest parts of you who you're becoming. And once a person understands their fire was earned, they begin carrying themselves differently. Not above people, but with intention. Because whether they realize it or not, someone is watching the way you move through life. Let's talk about that next. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized how much of life people learn without anyone formally teaching them? They learn by watching how people react, how they speak, how they handle pressure, disappointment, success, or uncertainty. And whether we notice it or not, we become a reference point for each other. That's one of the strangest responsibilities of being human. Because someone is always observing the way you move through life. Maybe it's your child, your friend, your partner, or a coworker, or someone online who has never even met you personally. And the truth is, people remember energy more than words. They remember how you carried yourself when things became difficult. They remember whether you became cruel or compassionate, whether you collapsed into bitterness or kept trying to become better than what hurt you. Think about that for a second. What are people learning from the way you currently live? Not the version you post, the real version. The one that exists in ordinary moments when nobody is applauding. Because torchbearers understand something important. Leadership is not always loud. Sometimes leadership is simply the decision to carry yourself with integrity whilst life is testing you. And honestly, a lot of people underestimate how deeply their presence affects others. They think influence only belongs to celebrities, or leaders, creators, or public figures. But influence exists anywhere human beings observe each other long enough. A younger sibling watching how you handle failure. A friend watching how you recover after heartbreak. A stranger watching the way you treat people when there's nothing to gain from it. Those moments matter more than most people realize. Because every day, consciously or unconsciously, people are gathering evidence about how you live. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is become evidence that growth, healing, accountability, and resilience are still possible. That's why the 8th Torchbearer Commandment is this: you are somebody's reference point. Carry yourself like someone might follow your footsteps, because whether you intended to or not, someone may be already learning to face life by watching you face yours. And eventually, every torchbearer realizes something else. The flame was never meant to stop with them. Now let's talk about that next. At some point, personal growth stops being only about you. That's a major turning point. Because in the beginning, most people evolve for survival, to heal, to rebuild, to make sense of their pain. But eventually something changes. The lessons begin stretching beyond the individual, and a person starts realizing, maybe what I learned wasn't only meant for me. Think about it. Some of the most meaningful guidance you've ever received probably didn't come from someone perfect. It came from someone honest, someone who lived through something difficult, and then they chose to share wisdom instead of hiding the scars. That's how light moves through people. Not through perfection, through transmission. One person survives something, learns from it, and unknowingly leaves the door open for someone else to survive too. That's why torchbearers eventually understand something important. The flame was never meant to stop with them. Growth becomes more meaningful when it's shared. Wisdom becomes more powerful when it helps someone else suffer a little bit less. And no, that doesn't mean that every person needs a massive platform or audience. Sometimes passing the torch looks much smaller than that. A conversation, encouragement, patience, or honesty. Or showing someone they're not alone in what they're carrying. Those moments matter deeply. Because people rarely forget the individuals who help them find light during darker sessions of their life. That's why the 9th Torchbearer Commandment is this: the torch is not yours alone. Light the way for others. Because one of the most meaningful things a person can do with their life is use what they've learned to help somebody else walk forward a little bit more clearly. And maybe that leads us to the final commandment of all. Because in the end, every torchbearer leaves something behind. Let's talk about that next. In the end, most people are not remembered for perfection. They're remembered for presence, for the way they made people feel, for the way they carried themselves when life became difficult, for the light they brought into rooms that needed it. And honestly, I think torchbearers understand something that many people spend years overlooking. Life is not only about achievement. It's also about impact. Not performative impact, human impact. The kind that quietly changes people. Think about it for a second. Somewhere in your life right now, there are probably phrases, lessons, or moments you still carry from people who affected you deeply. Maybe they encouraged you. Maybe they believed in you when you were struggling. Maybe they simply treated you with kindness during a season where you desperately needed it. Those things stay with people, and they stay with people far longer than we realize. And maybe that's the part of what it means to leave the path brighter. Not to become perfect, not to become endlessly positive, but to move through life in a way that leaves behind more understanding, or more wisdom, more compassion, more courage than what existed before you arrived. Because darkness is easy to spread. Hurt people spread hurt every single day. But torchbearers make a different decision. They refuse to let pain become the final thing they contribute to the world. That choice matters, especially now. Especially in a world where so many people feel disconnected, exhausted, uncertain, or emotionally lost. Which is why the final torchbearer commandment is this: leave the path brighter. Leave the world with more light than you found. Because at the end of all this, people may not remember every word you said, but they will remember the energy you carried, or the courage you modeled, or the way you made life feel a little less heavy for the people around you. And honestly, that's a beautiful way to be remembered. You know, maybe that's what personal evolution really is. Not becoming untouchable. Again, not becoming perfect, but becoming more conscious of the kind of energy or wisdom and humanity we bring into the world after life tests us. Because every torchbearer eventually realizes something. The goal was never to avoid hardship completely. The goal was to become someone capable of carrying light through it. And honestly, if you've made it this far into the episode, there's a good chance that part of you already understands that. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe that's why these conversations resonate with you in the first place. Because something inside you recognizes the journey, the rebuilding, the evolution, the decision to keep growing instead of shutting down. And I think that matters, especially right now, because the world does not need more people pretending to have life perfectly figured out. It needs more people willing to evolve honestly, people willing to heal, people willing to become deeper instead of harder, people willing to leave the path brighter for someone else walking behind them. And maybe that's what a torchbearer really is. Not someone who's perfect, just someone who decided darkness would not be the final chapter of their story. Thanks so much for spending this time with me today. And if this episode connected with you, helped you think differently, or gave language to something you've been feeling, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, or follow, share the show, and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. I'm also very excited to reveal to you that episode 80 will be the next episode of Messages from the Universe, Volume 7. These special messages are the most downloaded and demanded from my listeners from around the world. Be sure to listen to Volumes 1 through 6, but especially Volume 5, which is Episode 40 in Season 2, Part 7. This is my personal favorite. Thanks again for continuing to go on this journey with me. Thanks for hanging out, and have a wonderful week.